Hello, today's video is going to be all the things you need to know about feed-in tariff payments and how you can work this alongside battery storage without sacrificing those all-important feed-in tariff payments. The answer to your question is, can I have feed-in tariff payments and a battery storage system? Absolutely you can. So the first thing we want to know is, can I have a battery and keep my feed-in tariff payments? So most people are earning with a feed-in tariff system in between about 20 pence and about 70 pence per kilowatt. And particularly if you're on the upper scale of that, you do not want to sacrifice those payments because every year you're probably getting a check for about £1,000. And the last thing you want to do is install battery storage and sacrifice those payments. The most simple and straightforward method is AC coupled. The first thing is understanding your existing system and how that's probably operating right now. So you'll have an inverter and that'll probably be in your garage, or that's going to be up in your attic, and that's busy getting all of the solar rays. Now that tracks via a thing called a generation meter. So you get those feed-in tariff payments based upon that meter reading that you'll give into your energy provider. The next thing you'll then have is deemed export, and you get a fixed amount based upon what they think you're going to export. So the system that we would propose installing with battery storage, or that you might be thinking of installing, needs to ideally sit after that generation meter. So essentially solar rays happen, you get DC current, inverter converts this into alternating current. We then use a current tracking clamp that then goes through the generation meter first, clocking that generation meter payment and then storing that all important energy into your battery. So mid-meter reading number one is generation meter, so you still paid your feed-in tariff payments. Your deemed export changes to smart export guarantee. So you could go on something like Octopus Outgoing, you could go on Flux, for example. And then what happens is this deemed export gets changed to the actual export that you're sending out to the grid, and you get paid a secondary payment for that, often an uplifted payment. So you get paid 15, 16 pence per kilowatt, but it's based upon the exact amount that you're sending out to the national grid. As long as you're doing it after the generation meter, the energy suppliers are okay. Well, some energy providers that do feed-in tariff will allow you to do hybrid. Now you need to check the individual terms and conditions on this. But effectively what would happen there, we need to fit a bidirectional meter. So what they then do is take the incoming charges, so this energy that you're drawing in from the grid, and that clocks through this meter. And then the energy that you provide on the roof, so you're generating on the roof, clocks again, and you get two different readings. So essentially what we're looking at is for the difference between the two, and the feed-in tariff payment is based upon that. That can often be a little bit more complicated with a hybrid. It's from having done these applications with energy providers, they tend to ask a lot more questions. Now, when you're looking at Powerwall 3, this is a DC coupled battery. If you try and set it up with the PV input directly into the side of the Powerwall, your feed-in tariff payments will unfortunately be affected, because essentially energy has to go in through the battery first and out the other end. And they simply don't seem to like that as a proposal. You can still have a Powerwall 3 though, because we can set those up in an AC coupled format so it can go through the generation meter. Your energy provider's nice and happy because they've got a nice generation meter reading. And second of all, you can have your battery storage and your whole home backup as well. So that will work. So the next question I get often asked is, can I charge cheap energy into my battery storage at night using off-peak tariffs? Well, yes, of course you can. You get your feed-in tariff payments via your generation meter, and what you're then able to do is get your smart export via your smart export meter, and then your import, you're able to move that onto a smart tariff as well. So you could move to Octopus Agile, for example, and make the most of individual time slots that are available. Or if you've got an EV, you could go on Octopus Go Intelligent and charge that battery storage up at the same time windows that you've got nice, cheap electricity. So it's absolutely, you're able to get the best of both worlds in keeping your feed-in tariff payments and at the same time making the use of cheap off-peak electricity when it's green and renewable from the grid. Another real common question that we get asked is, I've got a feed-in tariff system and I want to generate more energy. Or it may well be the case of a part of my feed-in tariff system is broken and I don't know what to do because I'm concerned about losing those feed-in tariff payments. The first one I'm going to deal with is maintenance on a system. So there are three main parts to a feed-in tariff system. You've got your solar panels that'll be up on your roof that could well have a fault with them. You could have your inverter that could well be faulty if you've stopped generating, or it could just be your simple generation meter that's failed. Now these feed-in tariff providers get quite fussy when you want to replace replace all three, because it's very unlikely from a maintenance perspective that you're going to want to replace all three parts at the same time, because all three are unlikely to go faulty. So if that is the case, you must write to them in advance and get some permissions from them. But most commonly, you might get an inverter failure. So your inverter is now 10 years old and it's packed up. It's easy and straightforward. You can replace that inverter, and as long as you're using an MCS approved contractor, they normally send you a couple of forms afterwards, after installation, that your contractor will fill in alongside a schematic diagram, send that over to them, and your feed-in tariff payments work as normal. Well, actually, I want to increase the size of my system. Most of these systems are 3.68 kilowatts or below, which is quite typical for a feed-in tariff system. So there's a couple of options, one of which is to add a separate solar array, but clock the generation separately. So you keep your feed-in tariff, but you set a separate inverter on the system, so it sits way outside of your feed-in tariff payments. That's one way of doing it. The other option is if you think, well, I don't really want another inverter. My inverter's broken, I just would like one inverter. If you increase the size of the array, most of the energy suppliers, and do check before this, will simply allow you to increase the size of the array, will increase the size of the inverter. You normally have to keep at least one of the three parts, so solar panels, inverter, or generation meter the same. They will normally allow you to increase it, and what they will do is simply pay you the feed-in tariff payments pro rata. So if you had, say, hypothetically speaking, a 4 kilowatt solar system and you now want a 6 kilowatt system, you would simply get paid 2/3 of the payment, and then you get the benefit of any smart export guarantee that would replace your deemed export. So absolutely it's possible to maintain a feed-in tariff solar system and get the benefits. Now, like with all things with feed-in tariff, each individual energy supplier is different. We would always recommend writing an email to the actual energy supplier before, find out what their nuances are, get their terms and conditions, have a good read, because the last thing you want to do is be sacrificing any of those feed-in tariff payments. If you have any other questions or queries about feed-in tariff or want to speak with one of our engineers, feel free to get in touch. Thank you.